The phrase of one's own free will means uncoerced. When we use the words free will outside this phrase, as for example when we say something like, the Libet experiments demonstrate that there is no free will, the phrase is a pure term of art. That is, in the work of a given writer, it means no more and no less than what that writer says it means. It is therefore pointless to debate about what free will is or what the phrase free will does or should mean. And yet, philosophers do this, scientists too. And the result is nonsense. I will defend this thesis by looking at some examples. I begin with Daniel Dennett's latest thoughts on free will. Those contained in the chapter on that topic in his recent book, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking. But lest you think that my target is those philosophers who, like Dennett, take what you might call a deflationary position on, quote, free will, unquote, let me assure you that I will consider examples of philosophers conveniently cited by Dennett who speak favorably of things like ultimate moral responsibility and absolute free will and agents who are perfectly free to do otherwise. Those philosophers and Dennett, in my view, occupy two sides of the same coin. That is, they and Dennett both suppose that what is free will is a meaningful question. Now, one of Dennett's targets in that chapter is those scientists who contend that science has shown that free will is an illusion. He says that these scientists that they, now I'm quoting, have typically been making a rookie mistake, confusing the manifest image with what we might call the folk ideology of the manifest image. I'll break in myself here to say that Dennett regards free will, like color and solidity, as a denizen of what the philosopher Wilfred Sellers called the manifest image. That is the picture of the world that's contrasted with something called the scientific image. Okay, back to Dennett's words. The folk ideology of color is, let's face it, bonkers. Color just isn't what most people think it is, but that doesn't mean the manifest world doesn't really have any colors. It means that colors, real colors, are quite different from what most folks think they are. Similarly, free will isn't what some of the folk ideology of the manifest image proclaims it to be, a sort of magical isolation from causation. I wholeheartedly agree with the scientific chorus that that sort of free will is an illusion, but that doesn't mean that free will is an illusion in any morally important sense. It's as real as colors. That's the end of one quotation, and then shortly thereafter he says, speaking of those same scientists, that they are making the mistake people make when they say that nothing is ever colored. Not really. They are using an unreconstructed popular concept of free will when they should be adjusting it first, the way they do with color. End of quotation. Now, I'm not convinced that science has shown us that color just isn't what ordinary folk who know nothing of the physics of electromagnetic radiation or the psychology and physiology of color perception think it is. Let's call them the folk. This is not because I think that what science has revealed about color shows that color is what the folk think it is. It's rather that I'm not sure whether the folk think color is anything, bonkers or not. Well, I'm not sure whether they have any particular views on what color is. I'm not sure whether there is a folk ideology of color. If there is such an ideology, I would ask, what is its propositional content? Dennett mentions the indisputable facts that electromagnetic radiation with the wavelengths in the 390 to 700 nanometer range is not made of little colored things, and that atoms have no colors. But I can't tell from the context of that remark whether he meant to imply that the denials of those two propositions were contained in the folk ideology of color. If he did, he would certainly be wrong, since this folk ideology of color, if it ever existed, must have antedated our knowledge of atoms in the modern chemical sense of the word, and of electromagnetic radiation. But let's suppose that Dennett is right. There is a folk ideology of color, and scientific investigation shows that it's just plain wrong. But we should not infer from the just plain wrongness of the folk ideology of color that color is an illusion. It's just not what everyone used to think it was and what the folk still think it is. But what then does it mean to say that color is real? And why does Dennett think it is real in that sense? Well, he doesn't explain what he means by real, and he doesn't exactly argue for the reality in any sense of color. What he says in defense of the reality of color is more along the lines of an appeal to common sense. Another quotation. Color is not an illusion in the sense that it matters. Nobody thinks Sony is lying when it says that its color televisions really show us the world of color, or that Sherwin-Williams should be sued for fraud for selling us many different colors in the form of paint. End of quotation. I would myself offer something a little more theoretical in support of the reality of color, although what I would offer is certainly consistent with the point Dennett means those two examples to illustrate. I'd say something like this. Most of the statements that we make in ordinary life that contain color words, for example, the car that left the scene of the accident was a dark green Lexus, or titanium dioxide is the most common white pigment, or the predominant color of Picasso's La Vie is blue. Most of those statements are true. And statements like color is an illusion and color is not real, if they mean anything at all, and they certainly don't wear their meaning on their sleeves, must mean something that implies that most of those statements are false. But that's by the way. Dennett's thesis then is that free will is like color as he represents color. It's real enough, but it can't be what the folk ideology of free will says it is because science rules that out. The unreconstructed popular concept of free will, as he calls it, is inconsistent with what science has discovered about the nature of the beings, us, to whom it is supposed to apply. Now, I said a moment ago, in effect, that I wasn't sure whether there was any such thing as the unreconstructed popular concept of color, though I was willing to grant for the sake of argument that there was such a thing. But however that may be, there is certainly such a thing as the concept of color. That is to say that words like colored and green and brown and mauve are meaningful. Here is why the case of the concept of color, even assuming that Dennett is right when he says that there is an unreconstructed popular concept of color and that nothing in the real world corresponds to it, is not parallel to the case of the concept of free will. There is no such thing as the concept of free will. And of course, if there is no such thing as the concept of free will, there's no such thing as the unreconstructed popular concept of free will. But I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I say anything more about the non-existence of the unreconstructed popular concept of free will, I should tell you what Dennett thinks the unreconstructed popular concept of free will is, and I should tell you what the scientific image-friendly concept of which he means to replace it is. Well, as to the unreconstructed popular concept, he says this. People care deeply, this is a direct quotation, people care deeply about having free will, but they also seem to have misguided ideas about what free will is or could be, like their misguided ideas about color. Our decisions are not little miracles in the brain that violate the physics and chemistry that account for the rest of our body's processes, even if many folk think that this must be what happens if our decisions are to be truly free. We can't conclude from this, however, that we don't have free will, because free will in this bonkers sense is not the only concept of free will. Now, what is the scientifically more adequate conception with which Dennett proposes to replace the folk ideology of free will? He says this about it. The intuition pumps in this chapter are designed to wean you from the folk ideology of free will and to get you to see a better concept, the concept of real free will, practical free will, the phenomenon of the manifest image that matters. Unfortunately, Dennett never gets around to spelling out either the precise content of this concept or the concept it's supposed to be a replacement for. He does tell us quite a bit about both concepts, however. For example, he quotes statements by various philosophers that are intended to illustrate the folk concept, such as this passage from Jerry Fodor's review of his, Dennett's book, Freedom Evolves. Jerry Fodor said, "One wants to be what tradition has it that Eve was when she bit the apple, perfectly free to do otherwise. So perfectly free, in fact, that even God couldn't tell which way she'd jump." And he quotes the following passage from Galen Strawson's review of the same book. Dennett doesn't establish the kind of absolute free will and moral responsibility that most people want to believe in. Now, Dennett supposes that this being perfectly free to do otherwise, this absolute free will, are not philosophers' inventions, but are components of the folk ideology of free will. He supposes that Fodor and Strawson have correctly identified what one wants to be and what most people want to believe in. And he seems to place special emphasis on Fodor's words, even God couldn't tell which way she'd jump. That is, he seems to suppose that absolute unpredictability even in principle of human behavior, is the essential core of the folk ideological concept of absolute free will. And I think that he sees Strawson's contention that to enjoy absolute free will, one would have to be the sole ultimate cause of one's actions, as also being essential to the folk ideology. He wonders why anyone would want to be in principle. Dennett wonders why anyone would want to be an in principle unpredictable agent and the ultimate cause of one's actions, and why anyone would be attracted to the belief that we were agents of this sort. And well, he might. I would too, at least if I was sure I understood what Fodor and Strawson were talking about. In my view, however, Fodor and Strawson are not reporting what the man on the Clapham omnibus, as he used to be called in Oxford, wants to be or wants to believe in the existence of. They are rather reproducing some ideas invented by philosophers. In J.O. Austin's well-known phrase, a certain special, happy style of whimpering philosophical English. In any case, Dennett wants to replace the folk ideological concept of free will with something else, a better candidate for the office free will, something that's consistent with our present scientific knowledge, something that isn't bonkers, something that it would really actually make sense to want to have oneself and to want to believe that one's fellow human agents had. My only problem with this project is that there's no such office. Whatever the replacement may have and he may have in mind may be, there's nothing for it to replace. Well, let's suppose we have Dennett's concept before us. Whatever precisely it may be, I'm happy to let him call it free will if that's what he wants to call it. And then let him and Fodor and Strawson fight over the words free will. Let them fight over who's got free will right, or over what free will really is, or would be if it existed. Let Fodor and Strawson accuse Dennett of purveying, in Kant's words, ein elender Behelf, a miserable substitute, or of leading his readers into, these are William James's words, a quagmire of evasion. Let Dennett reply that a belief in the phenomenon Fodor and Strawson want the words free will to designate would be as bonkers as a belief in levitation, a comparison he uses at one point. I contend that such a debate would be about an entirely meaningless issue. It's certainly about a meaningless issue if, as I suppose, there is no concept that goes by the name free will. But suppose I'm wrong about that. It's at least not evident that the debate would be a meaningful one even in that case. Suppose most people do believe, or want to believe, that what they do is in principle unpredictable, and do believe, or want to believe, that they are the sole causes of what they do. Why would what Dennett offers as a substitute for that, for what they want to believe in or want to be, why would it be a substitute, even a disappointing substitute for those things? Let us grant that what Fodor and Strawson say people want is indeed non-existent. Still, not just any existent thing counts as a substitute for just any non-existent thing, if I may so express myself. Imagine this exchange. I want to find the fountain of youth. Oh, you're like Ponce de Leon. You want to find the unreconstructed folk ideological fountain of youth. That's bonkers. There's no such thing. But fortunately, the fountain of youth exists. It just isn't what we thought it was. It isn't a fountain that when one drinks from it, one is magically restored to youth and then never ages. It's a regimen of diet and exercise that can extend the vigor of one's youth by as much as 15 years. The only thing that ties Dennett's substitute to the Fodor-Strawson original is the phrase, free will. It's that they both use the words free will. And they can call it that if they want, but I don't see why they want to call it that. Suppose I'm wrong about all that, though. Suppose there is some meaning, even some value that attaches to debates about what free will is. Even if that were true, there would be something odd about these debates. And that's because when philosophers did recognize, say in the 20 years between 1965 and 1985, that free will was a free term of art, they gave it a certain stipulative, arbitrary definition. They used it to define an important philosophical problem. And the problem is this: free will, in their arbitrary sense, seemed to be required for moral responsibility. And it seemed to be compatible with both determinism and indeterminism. There are good arguments on both sides, but if it's compatible with both determinism and indeterminism, it can't exist. And if it's required for moral responsibility, then nothing that's ever happened has ever been anyone's fault. No one is ever to blame for anything. But that's obviously wrong, so something's gone wrong somewhere in the argument. Well, if free will was really just a term of art that had been given a stipulative definition, you could plug that stipulative definition into those arguments, and you would still get an argument for the conclusion that nothing is ever anyone's fault. I think that argument for that conclusion is what's the problem? What's wrong with that congeries of arguments is one of the great central problems of philosophy. That since you could state that problem without using the word free will at all, so that you could just go back to the arbitrary definition of the term that philosophers were using in those days, an argument about what free will really is has nothing to do with that great central problem of philosophy. And therefore, even if there was some value to a debate about what free will was, it wouldn't have anything to do with the great central problem of philosophy that used to be called the problem of free will. And there I'll stop. Thank you.